We are coming off of an incredible baseball World Series, and there were so many just extraordinary plot lines in the 7-game championship. But the one that we are going to use as an inroads to today's topic is the LA Dodgers pitcher Yoshinobu Yamamoto. In just an absolutely incredible, gutsy performance in this World Series. Yamamoto threw a complete game for the Dodgers to get the win in Game 2. He came back in Game 6 and threw 96 pitches to get the win in Game 6. And after Game 6, he said that he would be ready to go the next night in Game 7 if he was needed. And everybody laughed. Commentators called it insane. That was the word. Yamamoto is insane. Well, guess what? Game 7, things didn't go to plan. The game didn't go 9 innings. It went 11 innings. It went into extra innings. And who did the Dodgers call on when they needed a pitcher to shut down the Blue Jays most? They called on Yamamoto, who threw 34 pitches out of the bullpen, only gave up 1 hit, 0 runs, and helped secure the win for the Los Angeles Dodgers.
The Dodgers stand tall!
Now, some context for those of you that aren't baseball fans. Pitchers' arms, they're among the most studied and protected limbs in sport. A pitcher who throws too many innings is a recipe for inaccuracy, if not injury. Throwing 100 pitches in 3 hours is like having a lightning bolt shot through your elbow over and over and over again. Most starters, they rest 4 or 5 days before throwing again. But Game 7 is Game 7. Sometimes you stop counting, you stop worrying about the analytics, you show up, and you get the job done. Yamamoto, he threw 2.5 almost flawless innings. He didn't ask if he was rested or what his recovery score was or whether the data said he was optimized. He stepped up, he trusted his training, and he gave what he had to give. This is Excellence Actually. I'm Brad Stahlberg, joined as always by my co-host, Clay Skipper and Steve Magnus.
Brad set that up very, very nicely. We are going to be talking about sort of the middle way, the way to be excellent between the two sides I think you often see. I'm going to frame this like Brad usually does because I think it's a really good way to frame it. On one hand, you have what we often call the optimization bros, right? And these are the people who are, it's not just bros, obviously, but for sake of creating a title for the category, optimization bros, people who are obsessed with getting their routine perfectly right, who won't work out if their sleep score is not perfect or their whoop score is telling them they're not in the optimal zone to go work out. They're like taking conscientiousness to like too far of an extreme. On the other hand, you have people who are just grinding and winging it all the time, right? And I think what Yamamoto is such a great example of is finding this middle way of like relentless preparation, but then not getting so caught up in how to be optimized for performance that you miss an opportunity to go out and do something that maybe is not optimal. I'm putting that in quotes for people who can't see on paper, but it's like an opportunity to just trust your training, your preparation, and let it rip. A saying we've been coming back to in the recent episodes, right? So that's what we're going to get into today, and we're going to take this outside the realm of sports, as we always do, and explain how this applies to your life and what your version of Yamamoto's Game 7 performance is. So a question I have for this, and we'll start with you, Steve, is like, how do you keep conscientiousness from tipping over into hyper-control, where you're getting so fixated on having the optimal environment that you are making yourself fragile?
So let's start with this. Routines, rituals, whatever we want to call them, are great because they kind of ground us in the process. They send a signal, I've been here before. If I do these things that I can control, I'm ready to go. But the problem, as you outlined here, Clay, is that we can turn that routine or ritual into something that is kind of a crutch, where we feel we need or we have to do that thing. And we start over-controlling. And if we look at the research around choking in sport, one of the ways that we get to that is over-controlling a process that is, takes care of itself or is largely subconscious. So if we go too far into that over-control, we start straining, we start stretching for it, and we choke. So it's really this fine balance here. How do we address these things? I think there's a number of different avenues here, but I think number one is when you're developing your routine is have it be things that you can generally do almost anywhere, right? Where you don't need a specific magic tool or a specific magic thing. that if it's not there, you're done for. The second part I would say is develop flexibility into the system. Here, I always think about in track and field when we go to a world championship or Olympic Games. Track is like the simplest sport for dialing in a routine because generally you control everything until you get on the line, which is 10 to 15 minutes before the event. And it's all kind of scripted. Except when you get to Olympic Games, when you then go sit in a small, tiny room for like 50 minutes before because TV matters, presentation matters, so they need you stuck there. So your routine at the highest stage gets thrown off. So what do? You go with principles instead of strict, rigid things. And in practice, and when you can get into this, you build that flexibility in. You say, hey, what happens if we're only stuck in a small room, in this small little area? What can you still do? What happens if you have to sit on your feet for 15 minutes and then get to go out on the track and have 1 to 2 minutes to do a stride, a hop, a skip, or whatever you want to feel good again? How are you going to get that prepared? And you have to bake these into the system, even in situations that call for you to say, hey, no matter what, you got to be ready. If you have something to hold on to where you've deviated from the script, it's a much better go.
What I'll add is Steve is talking about what happens with the pre-performance ritual and routine, or even your day-to-day ritual and routine. In there, those are like actions or behaviors that you either engage in or you don't. And as Steve said, sometimes they're in your control, sometimes they're not. I think even upstream of that is just not limiting yourself by belief that says that I can't run hard 2 days in a row. I can't go out and throw 34 pitches after I just threw 96. Now, here's where this gets to be really nuanced. If you tell yourself that I can run hard 2 days in a row, I can throw back-to-back nights, start and then come out of the bullpen, and you do that all the time, you're deluding yourself and you're going to get injured and you're going to fall apart. So you have to have these basic principles. You have to pay enough attention to the things that you're measuring to stay on course. And if you do that 99% of the time, then the 1% of time or 2% of the time when life says you've got to release from it, you're able to, and you have to be okay releasing from it.
And I think this is one of the great definers of world-class performers, which is they hold these two contrasts really freaking well. Meaning they're super diligent about the process, about the routine, about the preparation, but they also have this ability to flip the switch and be like, F it. Like, let's do this thing. It's the Michael Jordan and the quote unquote flu game, which I guess was food poisoning. But it's the same thing. It's like, prepare. Everyone tells you, yeah, this is a little bit crazy, but your mind doesn't interpret it as crazy. You're able to just be like, okay, new day, new normal. How do I get ready for the task at hand? Like, put everything behind us. And I think the really good athletes that I've worked with have had this remarkable ability to just say, like, what happened. How do I get prepared for tomorrow or in a couple hours, no matter what is there?
Back to that, like, methodicalness and the let it rip and the non-duality of those two things. Yamamoto also journals in between every single inning of the game. And no one seems to know what he's doing in there. Some people have speculated that he's journaling about like his emotions and his mental experience. I think what's more likely is he's actually journaling about the pitches he threw and how batters reacted to him. There was this incredible stat in Game 6, which is that none of the Blue Jays hitters saw the same first pitch in the entire series facing him, which means that the same guy that can say, screw the analytics, screw my recovery score, none of it matters, I'm going to go out and win Game 7, also is so meticulous that he's documenting every single first pitch that he threw to a Blue Jays hitter so they don't see the same first pitch again. So it's like the relationship of insane conscientiousness and methodicalness with the ability to put all of that stuff aside and go in and get the job done.
Well, I think what it gets at really well is you focus on the details that matter, and I think that process probably lets them move on. because one person who journals that we do actually know what they write about is a double Olympic medalist high jumper Nicola Ollislager, who is famous for, in the Olympics, they show video of her. She's every jump, make or miss, she's writing about that jump. And what she does is she takes one thing that, hey, I didn't do this well, then what am I going to take forward? In that process, not only focuses on what actually matters, but it allows her to leave the past jump behind. So it's, again, this non-duality of saying, like, I'm going to be obsessive about every pitch, every jump, everything, but at the same time use that to say, okay, no matter how good or bad it went, I'm going to take information that will help me, leave the emotion and rest of it behind, and get focused on the job at hand. And I think if you look at Yamamoto, that's what he did really well, is in his mind, who knows what he was thinking. But I'll tell you what, if you're a normal person, and especially early on in those first couple pitches where he has precise control and he threw a couple, wild balls out there, a normal person's brain goes like, it's yesterday. You're feeling it. You're fatigued. Everything hurts. Everything doesn't feel right as smooth. But somehow Yamamoto was able to say, yeah, whatever, little lack of control, focus on the next pitch. What's the next thing I need to do? Forget how my arm feels or fatigue or what have you. Execute the plan, new day, new pitch. Let's get it done.
Brad, I want to go into something you wrote about this masterful performance, and you said, and I know this resonated with your readers because I was reading some of the comments about it, but you said, quote, one of the best things you can do for your performance is to not have things go to plan and still perform well. I think we should dive into that. Why? I mean, maybe it seems obvious, but I think like saying it explicitly would be helpful here, and like get into the psychology. Like, why is it that broken plans sometimes lead to breakthrough performances, right? Like, so why does it help your confidence? And also, why is it sometimes that's what happens when like things unravel and you just kind of have to say, F it, let it rip, that you sometimes have your best performances?
All right. So why does it help your confidence? That is fairly straightforward. Oftentimes, the idea that we need certain things to go to plan or to go a certain way, those are almost like external resources that, to use Steve's words, we're using as a crutch. So if I get the right amount of days rest, if my teammates show up in the way I thought, if it's really, really quiet when I sit down to write, if I can go through my pre-performance routine, those are all things outside of ourselves that we're counting on to go well in order for us to perform well. When things don't go to plan, when those things don't happen and we still perform well, it teaches us that actually we have it within ourselves. It's like the ultimate freedom. You don't even need the routine. You don't need things to go to plan because I've got this. In the research literature, it's called self-efficacy. And it's just an evidence-based belief that you can be effective, you can be efficacious, you can get the job done regardless of what's happening around you. So often, yes, of course, why wouldn't you control the controllables? Why wouldn't you have a plan that's going to support you? Of course you would. But then when those things fall apart, if you can still perform well, again, you teach yourself that you don't, forget being reliant on those things, you don't need them in order to perform well. Part two, why sometimes do people perform their best when the plan goes to crap? I think that my best guess at this is that often when the plan goes to crap, there's two routes. One is you panic and you start telling yourself, oh no, everything's awry, and then you're not going to perform well. The other route you said is, well, screw it. Like, the plan is to crap, so I don't know what the hell is going to happen, but like, fuck it, let it rip. And instead of being so tight and now trying to hold on and to control the plan, you just let go of control altogether and you just go out there and send it. And oftentimes we have our best performances in those situations because you feel like you've got nothing to lose. You know, when the plan and when everything goes right, well, then you've got a lot to lose. If you don't perform well, then it's like all the external things were in my favor and I still messed up. But when all the external things are out of your favor, it's just like whatever. It's like the Des Linden Boston Marathon win when it was like pouring rain. You know, what a day for her. And I remember in some interviews after the race, and I actually talked to Des about this just a little bit. It's like, yeah, like I'm a gritty person. It was a gritty day. Like all our plans about pacing and all this went out the door. And it just gave me a chance to just like compete and run. And it's almost like there's this mental weight that's dropped of not having to focus on all the other stuff.
With my athletes on my college team, we used to call it's a free lunch, meaning you're coming back from the race earlier in the day or earlier in the meet that didn't go that well, and you've got another shot, and you're kind of like, my main race is done. This is just secondary, and you just get to take a shot. And as Brad said, what happens is it takes a load off your shoulders. This is why so often in high school and college sports, you see athletes PR on the second race of their day. I bet you've seen this, Clay, where you're like, that shouldn't happen. You were fresher on the first race or opportunity. But often it does because they don't have that pressure, that anxiety. It's that free lunch effect. So sometimes just taking that load off can free us up to perform. I think the other part of this that Brad touched on that is really important is that sometimes you want to like engineer this. No, you don't want to engineer like back-to-back Yamamoto style like pitching, but you want to engineer a spot where they get thrown into a competition or a race or a performance that is intentionally a little kind of shaky, messed up, and jagged, whatever we want to call it. I remember sometimes I'd intentionally show up to the meet a little bit late, and an early season meet. Why? Was it my lack of planning? No, it was because I'm like, you know what? We're going to have less warm-up time. Let's see how these jokers handle it. And the point is to show them that even though you didn't have the perfect setup, that you could still go out there and perform on this day. I still remember it was my first or second year at Houston. We were in New York, the home of Clay Skipper, at the Armory, racing an indoor race. And for whatever reason, it was probably snowing outside, and we're Houston people and we don't have snow ever. Some of the athletes said like, hey, we can't warm up outside. And if you've been to the Armory, there's like no real warm up place to do anything except for a very short straightaway. So these guys started to jump rope as their warm up. They jump roped, they did a couple strides, and then they ran PRs in the 800, something like 150, 151, which is a really fast race. And afterwards, I didn't know this all went down because I'm managing like 25 different athletes at this point. But afterwards, they're like, Coach, I just ran a PR with my warm-up being jumping rope. And what that does is that frees you up, not to, escape the normal warm-up routine. We didn't go and say, everyone jump rope for your warm-up and that's it. We realized that like things didn't have to go perfect for us to show up and perform on that day. And that's probably the most freeing thing that you can experience as an athlete, because it becomes that little bit of evidence. We can call it self-efficacy. We can call it your brain using that evidence for your future predictions. But what it does is it gives you that little concrete thing to hang on to when the world is chaotic, when it's not going well, you go, oh yeah, I've been in a similar position before and I was able to come through.
So how does this affect everyone, whether you're an athlete, you're not an athlete, whether you're world-class and elite, whether you are just a mortal person? I think that I'm going to give this a name. This is the Andrew Huberman protocol trap. So what often happens is people think that they have to have all of these elaborate protocols and they have to absolutely be dialed in. And at first they get into it because, it's going to make me healthier. It's going to make me better. Of course I'm going to do this. But then what happens is you go further and further down the rabbit hole. And what you're actually trying to do is you're trying to control uncertainty, right? It's also Peter Attia's Outlive. There's a lot of good stuff in there, but you're doing all of this imaging and all of this testing and all of this blood working. And ultimately the uncertainty here is like, one day we're going to die, and you're trying to control that. With Huberman, it's health and performance. Like if I do all these protocols, if I take all these supplements, if I do all these breathings and cold plunges, I'm going to be at my best. So then what happens when something goes wrong? You get the longevity influencer, David Sinclair, who says, my sleep score was terrible. I feel like crap because I had a Nutri-Grain bar before bed. That is borderline, and I can't diagnose someone because I'm not a psychiatrist and he's not my patient if I were, but that's like a psychosomatic disorder. Having a Nutri-Grain bar in the evening should not mess up anyone's sleep or make them feel sick the next day. That is becoming so fragile and needing to eat a certain way and needing to be a certain way in order to feel good that when you can't, you feel like crap. Now, again, we don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. Having routines, good. Paying attention to your health, good. Getting your blood work, good. For some people, wearing an Oura ring or a Whoop, good. But you cannot become dependent on these things because it makes you fragile.
In the words of Sarah Hall, you got to know when to throw the watch away. Which, you know, if you know Sarah Hall, the marathoner is what do you do in the marathon? You got to pay attention to the details. You don't want to be like, hey, I'm going to wing it and go out in 5-minute pace. You want to pace it to a degree, be in a ballpark. But then at some point, it comes where you throw the watch away, which means you're in the race. You're in the moment. The watch is now getting in the way. It's telling you splits, and you're like, I'm at mile 18. Like, splits don't matter anymore. I'm in the grind. I got to throw this away, and whatever I got, I got. And you just push, and you compete. And I think what you're getting at, Brad, and what we're trying to say here is we've got to use the data, the analytics. We've got to use the routine, the ritual to, like, prepare. But we can't become a slave to it. We can't have it get in the way. We can't allow us to say, you know what? I'm in third place in the marathon and I'm running 5:20 pace, which my watch says I can sustain. But second and first, just surge to 5:15 pace and I'm going to let them go even though I've got 4 miles left. No, you're going with those MFers, right? Because you're competing.
Yeah.
Like, that's the time of the race to compete. You're Yamamoto saying it's Game 7 of the World Series. You're competing. You're not saying, my pitch count, I'm over it. Take me out, coach. Like, there's a time and a place to use everything. But there's also a time and a place to say, this is who I am. This is what matters. I got my boys and girls with me on this journey. Let's see what we can do. And to throw everything away.
The pendulum has swung really far from one extreme to the other. I think that when Steve and I and Clay, when we first started doing this stuff over 10 years ago, the bros were all about just send it, just go. Screw analytics, go harder, go home, bury yourself. And that was reckless. It got a lot of people injured. It burned a lot of people out. But then over the last 10 years, the pendulum has shifted to the total opposite direction, which is my recovery score has to be right. My HRV has to be right. I need 19 different protocols. And people have made themselves so fragile that they can't compete. And if you're not elite, you can't even be a normal person. So I just think like what we are trying to get to is the illusion or pseudo performance or grifting performance goes to an extreme. And the extreme is either fuck it, I'm going all the way, or the extreme is I need 48 protocols to go in the perfect planned direction. That's all pseudo performance. That's kabuki that does well on Instagram. Actual performance is saying I'm controlling the controllables, I'm being conscientious, I'm doing what I can, and I'm not becoming attached to it. And there's a time and a place to let go and be a human, not a robot, because we're all humans here. Lay it on the line and see what I'm capable of.
And here's the deal. No elite athlete worth their salt is paying attention to the recovery score Game 7 of the World Series. No elite marathoner is looking down at the recovery score when they wake up for the New York City Marathon and saying, it tells me I'm not in that good of a place. No, you turn that thing off, you throw it away because it's race day, and race day you show up. And too often we've kind of missed that boat, right? We've tied to the data, we've forgotten what it means to send it, and I think there's this crucial balance here. But just like for the runners listening, just like we've swung the pendulum when it comes to training zones where people freak out if their heart rate is like 3 beats too high. All you're doing in that situation is training fragility and training like a little bit of like, oh, I'm never gonna go too much on here. And you never get to explore what you're capable of. You never get to feel what it means like to throw the watch away and say, let's see what happens. And what we're saying is that there is freedom in that. Not all the time, but there is freedom in that, in letting go of all the extra stuff that we need to experience that kind of fine-tunes us to know when we should listen to the stuff, when we should tie ourselves to the routine a little bit, and when we should let go.
Yeah, I think that's an important point to underline, that also it's easy for us to sit here and Monday morning quarterback and be like, Yamamoto did something incredible by deciding to send it even though it wasn't optimal, and it worked out great for him. But there's a world in which it doesn't work out, right? And that's an important point to make too. But to never try that and fail, I think, is what we're saying here, is like that would be a mistake. I really don't want to compare my extremely mediocre marathon performance to Yamamoto. But to sort of use this as an example, like this is what happened to me yesterday. I was looking at my watch. My heart rate was way higher than I thought it should be through miles 1 through 5. So I actually turned the watch around on my wrist and I was like, miles 5 through 13. I'm just going to send it and see how I feel. And I, unlike Yamamoto, failed spectacularly, blew up completely at mile 15. And I'm saying that because it's an example of exactly what we're just talking about. We're like, you can decide to send it and not listen to the optimal zone, and it might blow up in your face. But at least this is how I'm maybe justifying my experience yesterday, but at least you gave it a shot. And I think that's what we're saying.
Didn't you also have a beer at mile 4 and mile 9?
Mile 8 and like mile 8.5. Yes. I also
that
2 beers in 4 minutes, Clay.
That tanked the recovery score. The score was going down.
Carbonated goose. To bring this out of perform, or not out of performance, but out of sports maybe, and competition, I think it's useful here to try to think through some other examples where this is the case, right? So in medicine, this is maybe when you're a surgeon and you're following everything to the T and something goes crazy during procedure and like, oh my God, I was following all the steps. What am I going to do now? Musician, this could be your equipment fails, or you're playing in a band and like somebody maybe did a little too many drugs and they're not playing great, right? Or the opposite, maybe you're playing jazz and someone has a really good riff and it's sort of like spontaneity and improvisation, right? Teaching or parenting, maybe it's like you've read all the books in parenting and you've done all the things to the T, and then your kid just has a freaking level 10 out of 10 meltdown in public, right? And now you can't use Dr. Becky's good inside protocols. You got to figure out what to do. So I do feel like there are ways in which this applies in every arena. And so I think maybe now what we can get into is some practical tools for everyone to think through how to think through this, right? So one question here is like, when you hear the voice that say something goes wrong and you hear the voice that's like, I can't do this. I'm not in the optimal zone. I'm not ready for this. Sometimes that can be fear. It's just like you're psyching yourself out. But it can also sometimes be like a valid voice. It's your intuition being like, I'm not prepared for this. I haven't done the proper preparation. And so I think maybe it's worth trying to differentiate when that voice is fear and when that voice is maybe like some wise intuition you should actually listen to. One way I have of thinking about this is like, fear is often general. It's just like it's like a contracting feeling of like, I can't do this. I'm nervous, and like makes you want to run away. Or Steve, to use the example you use a lot in running, like step in a hole or go hide in the porta potty. Whereas like wise intuition is often a lot more specific. For instance, to use my marathon again from yesterday, it's not that I'm like, I can't run hard. It's like, I can't probably run a 6:55 pace because I didn't run any 60:55 pace during my training, right? So it wasn't like I'm not good enough to run a marathon. It was like, I'm not good enough to run this pace because I haven't seen this pace in the last 16 weeks of my training block. So that's one way I try to like differentiate between actual wise intuition and just fear-based avoidance.
I think something else that you can do to practice this, I got from a good friend of Excellence, actually, the coach Stu McMillan. And he has this concept of a safe to fail experiment, which is just that. You want to run all these experiments where you're putting yourself out there, you're going off plan, but if you fail, it's safe. Now you have to define what safe means. Does safe mean you blow up in one marathon? Yeah, who cares? Like you're a runner, you're going to run more marathons. It's a safe to fail experiment. I go back to the case of parenting. There's so many parents that need, nap time to just be perfect. And I totally get it. I'm in camp optimized for sleep. So yeah, you want nap time to be perfect. But at a certain point, that starts to shrink your life. If you can never leave the house or make plans with friends or see people because your baby's taking 4 naps a day and they've got to have it perfectly quiet and peaceful at the same time, that might get in the way. So what's the safe to fail experiment? You take your baby out during one of the naps, and if your baby doesn't nap, then maybe they're up a little bit that night, but no one's going to die. It's a safe to fail experiment. So I think like those are the opportunities to push yourself. It's Steve getting to that meet that doesn't matter that much 30 minutes late, because the experiment is, what are they going to do if they don't have the full warm up? And if they fail, I doubt, Steve, you wouldn't do that at the national championships, but it's some random meet in, Tulsa. Yeah, go for it. Who cares? The barbecue's good.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly it. So I think one of the steps is like understanding a little bit through those safe to fail experiments of what it feels like to be in that hole and how to push or navigate your way through that hole. one of the ways I like to look at it is how can I manipulate constraints both in practice and in early season competition that kind of do these sort of prep work for us. So I mentioned the showing up late for a meet, right? Low-key competition, do it. You can do something similar when you look at preparing for your interval workouts. Instead of having your standard warm-up, sometimes I'll be like, you know what? We got 15 minutes till go time, like figure it out. Or instead of having the entire track to warm up in so you can do all the stuff you need to, you say, hey, we're going to take the goal box of the soccer field and like, you got to stay in here for the next 15 minutes to get ready. And all you're trying to do is expand their evidence or their kind of vocabulary for understanding how to get prepared to do something relatively hard. And when push comes to shove, you call back on that experience. So like Brad said, so much of this is creating evidence, not just for confidence sake, but also to help you delineate when there's like the evidence that Clay met with, which is like, I'm not prepared for this and should actually listen, versus the evidence that says like, I'm prepared to handle this. I just might not feel good. But if I can navigate that not feeling good, I can still perform probably good enough to get the job done.
Before we wrap up, I don't know where you were going to take us, Clay, but you in researching the show, you came across some phenomenal Japanese concepts that Yamamoto takes with him, and I think that those are worth sharing too.
Yeah, I will almost certainly pronounce these wrong, so forgive me. But I was reading, again, in this Jeff Passan ESPN story, it talks about how he works with, I don't even know what you'd call him, a biomechanic, a biomechanist, but his name is Yada Sensei, and it's talking about the building where he works out of in Osaka, Japan, and it says Japan's #1 spiritual and physical strength shop, that's fantastic marketing. But on the website for it, it says growth is through, and this is where I'm going to mispronounce, Tariki Hangen, which as far as I can tell translates to like relying on other power. I'll come back to that in a second. And Jiriki Hangen, which is self-reliance, right? And so I think it just maps so neatly on what we're talking about here today, because like self-reliance or self-power, Jiriki Hangen, is like working really hard, preparing really hard, having, the self-belief and the confidence that comes from evidence. But then the Tariki Hangen is like having the faith that there's, something else that can help you if you just like let go of the optimization and let it rip, right? And so I think it's like this interesting mix of self-reliance and also faith, that even if it's not, I'm using scare quotes, people who listen to the podcast, the optimal time to do something, you can still send it. And because of all the work you've done up to that point, you might have one of those special lightning in a bottle Game 7 moments that Yamamoto had.
The best definition of faith I've ever come across is from the late Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh, who said that faith is confidence born from realizing the fruits of practice. So faith is the confidence that is born from realizing the fruits of practice. So you practice like crazy, and you've got enough confidence that you can have the faith to make the jump. It's not blind faith. It's not dogmatic faith. It's not delusional faith. It's the faith a farmer has that their crops are going to grow because they sowed the seeds, and they sowed the seeds with care. And like, that's it. I mean, that is evidence-based faith.
Two things before we close out here. I think first, I think we should talk about building an anti-fragile routine, right? Because we have acknowledged that routines are really important, but the problem is when you become so wed to it that it becomes a source of anxiety if you can't stick to it perfectly. Steve said something way earlier at the very beginning that I think is worth reiterating, which he's talked about sort of building your routine on principles. I think of this as like principles over prescriptions, right? So instead of being like, I have to run 5 miles at 7:32 a.m., it's like movement before, if that's the beginning of your day, movement before work, right? And so if you have 6 minutes, you're not going to be able to go on your 5-mile run, but you can get down and you can do some stretching. You can do some push-ups. You can like go for a walk around the block, right? If you have movement before work, it frees you up to do so many more things than if it's, I need to do my 5-mile run at zone 2 for this amount of time at this amount of time.
It's being the expert chef and not Steve cooking.
Yes.
Which is like Steve cooking is like, I need the recipe. I'm going to follow this because or else it probably won't be edible. So we're going strictly by the recipe. The expert cook is like, chef is just like, all right, we got a little bit of this. I know this will pair with it. I know this will be okay. If we don't have this, I'm going to substitute this other ingredient. They have the knowledge base to just use those principles to still create something that is really good. And sometimes it's different than what you might have gone into it. And I think that's the same with routines. And the way I often taught it for athletes was this idea of like, here's a bunch of different things on the menu that you can utilize, understand what they do, and then be able to be at least competent in most of them so that when push comes to shove, you can utilize them. And maybe you have a typical preferred routine of doing these stretches or these dynamic drills. But guess what? If the constraints are there, you can say, you know what? Forget it. I know my legs feel good after I do some leg swings and then jump rope. I got 5 minutes. We'll do that. I know my legs feel good when I do a really hard stride and then hop into the air. Great. Constraints make it where that's all you got. Utilize that. Pull that out. So I think when you're developing these routines, think less of it as this strict, rigid recipe, but instead of, here's all the ingredients I could use. I need to know what they generally do, and then I need to fit them to what I have available to me in this endeavor, in this competition, to help me get to a place where I can still show up.
And then keep the main things and focus on what actually matters. So for a lot of people in sport and in knowledge work and in the performing arts, the most important part of any routine is caffeine. So coffee, a Celsius, if you're about to hit a big lift, like you can generally get coffee or a Celsius anywhere. If not, you can bring it with you. Like, okay, that's it. Like that, you don't need more than that. Your breath is the most portable routine ever. So if there's a certain way to breathe or a breathing exercise, if there's a mantra that you can say to yourself to just like provide your brain something to latch onto and a little bit of stability, like you can carry your thoughts with you wherever you go. I think where people get into trouble is forget pre-performance routine, but just when like their day-to-day routines get so complex that it leaves no space for chaos, no space for uncertainty, no space for having a boyfriend or girlfriend, no space for having kids, no space for a dog that vomits on the carpet. And then life gets in the way and you spiral. And it's not that there's uncertainty that ruins your day. It's that you're freaking out about your routine that ruined your day.
I would also say that sometimes it's worth just like either mixing up your routine intentionally or not doing it at all and getting used to that feeling of anxiety. Because I really think so much of this is really ladders up to like a discomfort with uncertainty, as you brought up earlier, Brad. I mean, you could make the argument that a lot of routines and protocols are just another form of superstition, right? Where you're like trying to guard against the idea of like, I'm scared because I don't know what's going to happen and if I'm going to do well. And so sitting with that feeling of like, I didn't do my routine, but I have to like do the thing, do the presentation, do the work anyway, that being able to work with that anxiety and stress rather than try to inoculate yourself from that anxiety and stress by creating this routine that gives you this sort of superstition or buffer against uncertainty. I think like working and flexing that muscle is a really important thing to do.
I think one of the things that I suggest people do is figure out the minimum effective dose to get ready. And for intellectual pursuits, that literally could be nothing or taking a sip of coffee, right? If I'm sitting down to write, yeah, sometimes I have a routine, but my minimum effective dose is put the computer in front of me and go. For physical pursuit, guess what? I can't go out the door and start hammering 400-meter repeats because I'm old and something will break. But when I was training with pushing my oldest, who's now 2.5, around, I didn't have much time to work out. So if I was going to the track, I needed to know what was the minimum effective dose to get me ready to run 400-meter repeats. Normally, that might be a long warm-up and a lot of drills and a lot of strides and stretching and all this stuff to get ready. Well, I had to realize, you know what? No, I got a mile to run. I got leg swings on both sides. I got one stride, and then I'm ready to go, and I'm going to use that first interval to kind of warm me up into it. And that was like the minimum dose to get Steve prepared to run 400-meter repeats because I just didn't have the time, or else my toddler would freak out and I couldn't get the workout in. So sometimes it's really helpful to understand and try and say, what's the minimum thing that I can do to get prepared to do this activity pretty dang well?
Yeah, I'll just comment by saying that I had a fairly elaborate, at least by my standard, routine prior to strength training for quite a long time. So I'd foam roll, I'd do some stuff with a band, all in the spirit of mobility. And 5 years ago, I had a coach that said, why are you doing all that? I'm like, I don't know. It's just kind of like what I've always done. Like mobility, it's important, whatever. He's like, just warm up with the bar. I'm like, what? He's like, yeah, you're going to deadlift, just start with the bar, then start adding weight. You're going to bench press, just start with the bar. And I haven't been injured for more than 4 days in the last 5 years. And I've saved myself 25 minutes a day from not having to do all this stuff. And my workout's a lot more enjoyable because I don't have to do all this tedious stuff before. Now, I'm a certain body, I'm a certain training age, I have a certain type of tissue. I'm not saying that this works for everyone, but ask yourself, what's the purpose of what you're doing? And if it's just to allay anxiety and it's not actually doing anything, then consider cutting it out. Because actually, for all that we talk about how important routines are, there's an entire chapter on routines in my next book. I think they are important, but the best routine is the routine that you don't have to do, because then it's one less thing that could go wrong and one less thing that you have to do. So we actually should be looking to not add protocols and routines, but cut back on them.
So let's piss some people off. In the running world, what you tend to see is that the best performers do fewer routines during their day-to-day and save the routines for when it really freaking matters. What do I mean by that? If you go down to the local park and watch all the Joe joggers, I love you guys, but if you watch all of them, they're doing all the foam rolling, all the thing, just to all of it, just to get ready for a 5-mile easy run. Meanwhile, the college kids, the former college athletes, the Steves of the world, if they're going easy, there's no pre-run routine. They're just out the door. We'll use the first mile to warm up into it. Let's get into the main thing. Now, counter that, if we're doing a really hard workout, guess what? Those experienced runners are going to take the time to prepare so that they minimize injury and risk, okay, if they're going to the well. So again, some of it is know when to do the thing and when not to. Some of it is knowing the minimum dose. Some of it is learning to get rid of all the fluff that is often just masking for insecurity. And to me, it just comes back to something we talked about at the very beginning, which is you gain self-awareness from putting yourself in the situation, experimenting in a relatively safe way, trying different things, and then having all that evidence before you so that when push comes to shove, if you need to throw it all out the window and toss the watch and just say, hey, let's go, you're able to because you've been in these places before.
If you are enjoying listening to the show, if you are watching us on YouTube, we are asking you to do us a favor, all right? Please share the podcast with a teammate, with a family member, with a friend. If you have someone in your life who is an optimization bro, maybe they could benefit from this, send it along their way. If you've got someone who just sends it and you're like, whoa, bro, you're not Yoshinobu Yamamoto, you need to calm down a little bit, send it to them too. If you've got a colleague at work and you are working together to try to do something important and big, and you think that this conversation could help their performance, could give you all a common language to use, send it to that person. We are doing everything that we can to grow this thing. We appreciate the support. We saw a comment the other day. Someone said that discovering this podcast is like investing in Amazon stock in the early days. Thank you to that person.
Damn, that is some high praise. I'll also say, because we've been getting a lot of engagement on YouTube, so this is for everyone, but podcast listeners, YouTube watchers, we have an email, clay.growtheq@gmail.com. We have a voicemail. It is 646-893-9503, or just comment on YouTube. We want to hear from you listeners. Curious what your Game 7 Yamamoto equivalent is in your field, discipline, or craft. So sound off with that. Please share this with one or two or many friends, and we'll be back next week with another episode. As always, take care of yourselves and be excellent to one another.